stop feeling alone. A Zen story on finding wholeness. Right now, there is a cold, hollow, and thinning ache resting directly behind your sternum. A deep sense of spatial imbalance that grows heavier the moment you turn to face the unpressed, vacant half of your mattress. You are lying awake in the late midnight stillness, listening to the absolute, unchosen silence of your kitchen, and the heavy echo of an empty room that seems to amplify the creeping fear that you are inherently unlovable. The persistent reality of long-term singlehood or an unmet romantic destiny sits like a frost on your chest, accompanied by a silent panic that claims you have been permanently forgotten by the world, while everyone else navigates life in comfortable pairs. You look at the flat pillow beside you and feel a profound sensation of personal failure, as if your solitary life were a broken fragment, an incomplete destiny that leaves you to face the trials of existence completely isolated, unsupported, and exposed to the dark. The physical space around you has settled into an unhurried, dark enclosure marked by the soft, distant hum of a water pipe, hidden inside the baseboards and the thick scent of dry wool rugs cooling in the shadows. The air carries the faint, crisp smell of cedar oil from the wooden wardrobe across the floor, offering an undisturbed sanctuary where the coupling of the outside world cannot demand your conformity. Yet, despite this stillness, your mind keeps searching the empty corners of your future, trying to figure out what is wrong with your personality, and rehearsing imaginary conversations to fix your isolation. You are holding your breath against a deep sense of lack, treating the absence of a romantic partner as if it were a structural defect in your very soul. But what you are carrying tonight, dear friend, is not a proof of unworthiness, and you are not broken. What you are feeling is not failure. It is simply the natural, heavy mourning of a heart that has been taught to believe it cannot be whole on its own. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be perfectly silent, nor will we try to fill the empty side of your bed with false promises of a future match. We are simply going to let the cold mist settle, so you can see that the space you inhabit is already a complete, sacred courtyard. There is a surprising, liberating paradox within ancient Buddhist wisdom that offers a dense, warm containment to this specific, hollow loneliness. The mind naturally assumes that a solitary human life is like a broken cup, an incomplete vessel that must constantly search for an external piece to clamp onto its side before it can ever hold water. We treat our identity as a deficit that needs a romantic mirror to achieve validity, believing that if we lie down alone, our spiritual ledger is running at an absolute loss. But the teaching of your own unconditioned nature reveals a much deeper truth. True fulfillment is a self-contained field of merit that requires no external completion to maintain its structural integrity. Your consciousness is not a fragment looking for a missing half. It is a deep, stable granite basin, fully capable of holding its own life, its own peace, and its own direct relationship to the universe, without needing to lean its weight against another person's shoulder. The empty space beside you is not an absence of love, it is the presence of an uncompromised freedom. If it feels right, take a slow, unhurried breath into the very center of your ribs, letting the cool air expand fully into that hollow cavern behind your breastbone, and let it pass out into the dark room with a long, heavy sigh. You do not need to force your emotions into a state of artificial cheerfulness right now. Nothing is required of you in this hour. The public social squares are empty. The couples on the streets have long since gone inside, and you are safe enough to soften the rigid, protective posture you have been holding against the silence of the room. Imagine your solitary life not as an abandoned house, but as a deep hand-carved stone cistern sitting completely alone in an old mountain orchard. The frantic reaching out for connection and the exhausting anxiety of proving your desirability have completely stopped for the night, and the granite basin is simply resting in the soil, letting its heavy walls be cradled by the dark, non-judgmental earth. Perhaps you have felt this too, during the quiet transitions of your week, a sudden wave of displacement that tells you that because your kitchen is silent, you have become an invisible spectator to the human story. We are surrounded by a restless culture that worships the domestic pair and treats the solitary traveler as a tragic anomaly, forcing us to internalize a deep sense of shame for our unshared spaces. But look at how, Even while your thoughts are spinning these dark scenarios of a lonely old age, your physical frame is being perfectly, unconditionally sustained by the mattress beneath you. The romantic destiny your intellect is desperately trying to chase or mourn does not exist anywhere in this room. It is merely a collection of social conditioning, a series of fragile shadows passing through the vast expanse of your awareness. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. The deep, quiet presence that witnesses your breathing does not require an unpressed pillow to be filled before it agrees to hold the absolute validity of your being. In a short while, we will travel up to an old mountain hermitage where a slow-moving keeper understands exactly why a solitary basin is a holy monument, not an empty failure. But before we open that narrative, let yourself simply land within the wide, unformed sanctuary of this late hour. You do not need to scrub the longing from your heart, or pretend the ache is not there before you are permitted to let your shoulders drop. Even the simple willingness to notice the cold thud behind your sternum without running away into digital distraction is a profound act of gentle, healing mindfulness. Let your jaw uncoil, let the skin across your forehead loosen its grip, and let your hands release the imaginary weight they have been holding. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your solitary place in the world. Tonight, you can let the courtyard grow completely dark, allowing your spirit to rest in the cool, self-contained center of the basin, where your true worth is safe from the changing seasons of human attachment. The gray, heavy mist of a late autumn twilight hung motionless over the high crags of the northern valley, where the mountain paths grew narrow and faded entirely into the wet slate. A lonely traveling scribe named Koi walked slowly through the perimeter of an old, abandoned mountain orchard, his straw sandals soaking through from the damp moss that cushioned the floor beneath the gnarled trees. The air was thick with the scent of overripe, fallen persimmons decaying quietly in the dark soil, mixed with the sharp, clean fragrance of wet pine needles and cold stone. Koi carried a persistent, thinning ache directly behind his sternum, a hollow weight that had intensified throughout his months of solitary travel across the provinces. In every town he passed, he had watched the warm orange glow of family hearths through paper screens, witnessing couples stacking firewood together and sharing the simple burdens of the harvest, while his own life felt like an unmapped, isolated corridor leading toward an entirely unshared future. He was consumed by the quiet, bitter conviction that some hidden defect in his nature had locked him out of the human circle, leaving him to navigate the vastness of the world without an anchor, completely unsupported and alone. He reached the center of the clearing, where a tiny, wind-bleached mountain hermitage stood in the deep shadows of the rock face. There was no grand temple gate, no courtyard filled with chanting disciples, only the immense, unlit silence of the high valley. Near the edge of the abandoned orchard sat a deep, hand-carved stone cistern, chiseled generations ago from a single massive block of rough, unpolished granite. The stone was dark with moisture, its surface covered in patches of pale green lichen that grew undisturbed along the rim. An elderly, slow-moving hermitage keeper named Master Wren stood beside the basin, his faded hemp robes brushing against the weeds as he reached down to lift a single physical object resting on the stone edge. It was a simple, hollow bamboo water ladle, dried by decades of mountain air to a pale straw color and split slightly along its curved lip from long exposure to the frost. Koi stopped at the edge of the stone courtyard, his hands buried deep within his sleeves to shield them from the rising mountain chill. His breath formed small, ragged clouds in the gray air, his voice tight with the raw, accumulated loneliness that had kept him awake for so many winter nights. He stepped toward the old keeper and spoke of his deep internal exhaustion, confessing how the sight of an empty room and a solitary mat made him feel like an outcast from the natural human destiny. He described the terrifying certainty that his solitary life was a failure of form, a broken design that meant he was inherently unlovable, destined to grow old in the cold periphery of other people's joy. He looked at the vast, silent valley stretching out beneath them and asked Master Wren how an old man could endure 40 winters of total isolation without going mad from the echo of his own footsteps. Master Wren did not offer an immediate phrase of consolation. nor did he turn his gaze to face the young scribe's anxious eyes. Instead, he slowly dipped the pale, split bamboo ladle into the dark water of the granite basin. A low, hollow clunk resonated through the silent orchard as the bamboo met the stone, followed by the soft, fluid sound of the water swirling into the cup. Ren lifted the ladle, holding it steady over the center of the cistern, allowing the cool water to pour out not only from its open top, but also to trickle steadily through the fine, split crack along its lip, returning every drop back into the deep reservoir from which it came. The action was slow, deliberate, and carried an immense, unhurried weight that forced Koji's racing thoughts to pause. The old keeper turned his face toward the mountain peak and asked Koi to look closely at the deep granite basin sitting in the dirt. He asked where the iron pipes were hidden that brought the water up from the wealthy, crowded villages in the lower plains, and how the cistern managed to stay full when there was no river to feed its walls. Koi stepped closer, his fingers touching the cold, rough granite rim. He replied that there were no pipes and no stream ran through this high ridge. The cistern sat entirely alone, gathering the autumn rainfall and the winter snow directly from the vast, open sky above the orchard. Master Rin dropped the split ladle back onto the stone rim with a soft click, his voice matching the low, steady drone of the mountain wind. He told Koi that the people in the lower provinces spend their entire existence believing they are like this split bamboo ladle, frantic tools that must constantly find another container to fill them, running from well to well, terrified that if they are left alone on the shelf, their split lips will leave them empty and useless. But your true consciousness is never the fragile ladle, it is the deep, solitary stone cistern. It does not need a network of earthly pipes to bring it completion, and it does not need to lean against another basin to hold its contents. Its very nature is to stand open to the entire universe, receiving its fullness directly from the sky, independent of any human arrangement. This solitude you fear is not a vacant abandonment. It is the absolute purity of a vessel that is large enough to hold the sky without needing to trap it inside a narrow house. Koi stood completely motionless beside the granite basin, his gaze fixed on the tiny stream of water still dripping from the split bamboo lip back into the dark, unruffled depth. A profound wave of emotional recognition washed through his chest, dissolving the cold, thudding vacuum that had kept his ribs tight for years. He realized that his long-term isolation was not a punishment for a defective life, nor was it an empty failure of his destiny. He had been exhausting his spirit, trying to turn himself into a tool that required an external hand to hold it, completely blind to the fact that his solitary awareness was already an island of pure, uncompromised presence. The bed he returned to each night was not half empty. It was a wide, sacred courtyard that was already perfectly full of the night itself. The old hermitage keeper turned away toward the stacks of dry pine logs near the wall, his slow, deliberate movements blending with the darkening shadows of the crags. The wind from the upper ridges grew sharper, carrying the scent of wood ash and frozen moss, wrapping the solitary stone cistern in a seamless protective mist that hid the rough contours of the orchard from the lower valley. Let this image of the rough granite basin and the pale, split bamboo ladle settle into the quiet background of your own awareness tonight. Notice how the traveling scribe did not need to instantly find a companion or receive a public validation of his character to feel a deep, physical sense of stabilization. He simply had to stop treating his solitary space as an environmental disease. The mountain orchard around the hermitage is resting in the absolute, dark quiet of the late night, and the cool water inside the cistern is perfectly still, reflecting nothing but the deep shadow of the sky. As you lie here in the safety of your own room, let your physical frame imitate the deep, self-contained weight of that granite basin in the soil. You do not need to alter your relationship status tonight, and you do not need to guarantee a shared future before you are permitted to let your eyes grow heavy. Let the frantic, replayed questions of your desirability sink down completely through the mattress, allowing your awareness to settle into the thick, non-judgmental stability of your own center, where the true value of your presence is safe from the changing arrangements of the world. This slow settling of the granite basin in the damp mountain soil is not telling us to stop feeling the genuine human warmth of affection. to abandon our natural longing for connection, or to look at our empty spaces with a cold, unfeeling numbness that strips the beauty from our emotional lives. It is not asking us to become like rigid stone statues that never experience the heavy ache of a quiet evening, or the raw sting of isolation when we watch the world pass by in pairs. It is showing us something much quieter, an internal posture that allows us to walk through the solitary stretches of our path without letting the fear of being alone destroy our underlying peace. When we lie awake under the heavy pressure of a silent room, our true exhaustion rarely comes from the simple fact that the other side of the bed is unpressed. The deepest, most agonizing suffering is manufactured by the way the mind holds that empty space, turning a temporary structural absence into a permanent verdict on our lovability. We create an invisible, crushing demand that insists we must find an external mirror to validate our presence, and then we panic when the room remains quiet. An ancient insight within this tradition reminds us that our human experience naturally contains a primary layer of difficulty, a first wound that is simply part of living in a changing world. It is the reality that people come and go, that relationships shift their forms, and that some seasons of our lives will inevitably be navigated in solitude despite our deep desire for companionship. This first layer of emotional weather is completely neutral, unavoidable, and carries no personal malice. It is simply the natural landscape of a fluid universe where separate paths cross and part like clouds in a high valley. But the second wound is the immense, burning weight we add to ourselves through our frantic psychological resistance. It is the repetitive internal commentary that claims your singlehood makes you an unwanted outcast, the constant replaying of past interactions to find a hidden defect in your personality, and the harsh self-judgment that treats a solitary bed as a total bankruptcy of your soul. Wisdom helps us stop adding this secondary injury to our hearts, allowing us to step back from the edge of the emotional cliff and realize that we can feel the cold mist of loneliness without letting it pull our awareness under the tide. When we translate these deep principles into the language of our modern emotional struggles, what we often call attachment is nothing more than that tight, anxious clawing that says, "Someone must hold my hand, or I am completely nothing." It is a desperate craving to tie our human value to an external arrangement, an assumption that if we can only find a partner, we can remain completely safe from the quiet vulnerability of existence. We treat the presence of another person as a source of our baseline completion, rather than a beautiful, passing gift to be shared. But mindfulness, when practiced with real soft tenderness, is simply the capacity to observe the terrified, racing thoughts behind your eyes without believing that every lonely voice is telling the truth. It is the ability to feel that hollow thinning behind your sternum, to notice the fear of a solitary future, and to whisper to yourself, "There is a protective panic trying to run my mind tonight, but I am the deep cistern, not the empty cup." This shifting of your internal perspective brings an immense cooling relief to our understanding of change. We are conditioned by a restless, romance-obsessed culture to view a solitary life as an intermediate failure, a waiting room where we must anxiously pace until someone arrives to rescue us from the dark. But the reality of impermanence also means that your current isolation is not a permanent prison, and no lack of an external partner can ever lock you out of your true inner wealth. Your capacity for deep love is not a fragile, dependent loop that can only activate when another person is looking at you. It is an infinite, flowing current of pure awareness that can hold the entire night sky, the falling leaves, and the quiet texture of your own breathing within its non-judgmental embrace. The flawed, incomplete self that your intellect is fighting so hard to fix does not exist anywhere in reality. You are an evolving current of presence, and just as the solitary stone cistern holds the pure rain without needing a single pipe from the valley, your life becomes infinitely wider when you allow your energy to move from the frantic striving for validation into the solid weight of your own seasoned depth. By welcoming this understanding into your quiet room, a silent, profound sense of compassion begins to dissolve the old, sharp criticisms you have been throwing at your own longing. True compassion is not a moral checklist. It is the radical willingness to look at your own heavy chest and realize that your anxiety was never a defect. You have been overthinking and panicking at night because you possess a beautiful, deep capacity for devotion and connection, not because you are broken or fundamentally flawed, but as the old keeper demonstrated with the split bamboo ladle. The ultimate worth of the basin was never determined by the fragile tools that dipped into its water. The fullness was held entirely by the stone container's direct, open relationship to the vast sky, requiring no external connection to maintain its permanent value. Your capacity for peace does not live in an unpressed pillow. It lives in the spacious, silent background that is currently holding your breath. Slowly, the weight of this ancient teaching moves closer to the immediate surface of your mattress, blending with the deep, rhythmic movement of your lower stomach in the dark shadows. You do not need to discover a perfect solution to your loneliness or guarantee a shared future before your body is permitted to let go of its guard tonight. The world outside your window has completely stopped its striving, letting the cool mist wrap the old trees without asking for validation from anyone. Allow yourself to drop the heavy burden of trying to prove your worthiness to an imaginary audience, recognizing that the very quietness you have been fighting is actually a spacious, cool sanctuary, waiting for you to stop searching for an external anchor and simply trust the depth that is already complete within your own heart. If it feels right, let your awareness begin to drift gently downward, away from the complex calculations of tomorrow and the heavy evaluations of yesterday, allowing your attention to anchor itself completely within the physical boundary of your body, resting here in the darkness. There is absolutely no need to adjust your physical frame with any sense of rigid determination. Perhaps simply notice the direct point of contact between your shoulders and the surface beneath them, letting the tiny muscle groups across your collarbones slacken a small fraction at a time. You might take a slow, unhurried breath in through your nose, tracking the cool sensation as it brushes against the back of your throat, and let it pass out through your mouth like a quiet, warm wind moving through a silent valley. There is no requirement for you to change a single element of this immediate hour. Even the simple act of noticing how tightly you have been protecting the area around your chest is an act of perfect, gentle mindfulness. You do not need to force the internal static to clear through sheer willpower. You only need to sit quietly at the center of your own unforced evening. As you continue to breathe softly, let your attention travel to the small, overactive fibers right across your brow and your temples, where the nervous energy of romantic comparison has been humming all day long. You might imagine those tight areas opening up, allowing your internal gaze to soften into the dark, velvety space behind your eyelids. Now let your awareness drop all the way down into your lower abdomen, your hips and your thighs, where your natural capacity for grounding lives. Do not try to minimize or push away the hollow restlessness that may still be vibrating inside your chest. Instead, simply name the emotional pattern that has been driving this current of anxiety. Perhaps it is the habit of demanding an external mirror before you permit yourself to feel fully visible. Perhaps it is the old, tired pattern of treating your natural solitude as a tragic deficit to be corrected. Just label it gently in your thoughts, recognizing it as a deeply protective mechanism that has only been trying to ensure your safety by keeping you in a state of perpetual defensive reaching. Imagine, if you will, the wide, quiet mountain orchard from the old story sitting securely right within the space of your own awareness. See the gnarled persimmon trees dropping their leaves like silent watchers in the shadows, and find the ancient, hand-carved granite basin embedded deeply in the damp soil. Instead of using your mind to desperately reach out into the empty room or recreate the warmth of an imaginary hearth, you might simply visualize your own torso as that deep, self-contained stone cistern, holding its own water perfectly without a single pipe to feed its walls. Watch what happens in your imagination as you place your current, spinning worries about singlehood, isolation, and an unshared destiny directly into the dark, still water of that granite basin. You do not need to force a sudden, dramatic breakthrough. Even letting the heavy weight of your longing rest upon that stable instrument without trying to cure it is entirely enough. Let the internal image change slightly now, allowing the specific romantic anxieties, the empty spaces of your kitchen, or the silent echo of your home to lose their sharp, jagged lines. They are not being erased or ignored. They are simply being allowed to blend with the cool, dark reservoir of your underlying presence, turning from an urgent crisis into a quiet stream of rainfall that rests peacefully at the bottom of the basin. If your thoughts try to pull you back into the specific details of your isolation, or if your pulse quickens with the old urge to escape your own company, that is completely okay. You can return to the heavy sensation of your bedding and the steady, hidden movement of the water pipes within your wall whenever you are ready. There is no failure if your focus wanders. The deep, ancient stone knows exactly how to hold a restless mind, and it does not require you to be perfectly still before it agrees to absorb your weight. What happened next as Koi moved toward the open-air courtyard near the meditation hall will show us an even deeper way to integrate this unmoving containment into your daily routine. But for now, let yourself remain right in this intermediate space where the work of seeking has been suspended. The dark air in your room remains steady, non-judgmental, and the heavy structure of your analytical guard is safe enough to uncoil, one small link at a time. You do not have to achieve absolute clarity about your future destiny before your eyes close for the evening. The purpose of this hour is not to force yourself to feel miraculously healed or instantly complete. The purpose is simply to help you feel less isolated inside the natural, turning seasons of your own life. Let your next exhalation be as wide and hollow as the mountain valley, holding nothing but the simple, unhurried movement of the night as it settles over the roof. The damp, windless evening deepened into an absolute indigo shadow across the open, moss-covered courtyard located behind the mountain meditation hall. Koi spent the following morning lifting heavy logs and sweeping the wet stone pathways, yet the physical labor had not erased the restless, searching vibration that lived behind his ribs. The intellectual realization that he was a self-contained vessel had not automatically dissolved the deep, habitual pull of his longing as the shadows lengthened. The sight of a stray bird flying back to its nest in the high pines triggered a sudden, sharp wave of isolation. His mind immediately went to work, spinning a familiar web of defensive calculations, replaying old romantic rejections from his 20s, and projecting a bleak, terrifying sequence of future winters spent pacing an empty room. The emotional challenge felt heavier now, because the temporary comfort of the first insight had faded, leaving him face-to-face with the raw, unchanging reality of his immediate singlehood. He walked toward the far corner of the mossy courtyard, where an old temple nun named Shizuka was preparing to set a massive, unlit stone lantern that had begun to tilt after the heavy autumn rains. Shizuka moved with a slow, deliberate economy of movement, her calloused hands lifting a single, smooth piece of gray river shale from a wicker basket on the grass. The air was thick with the rich scent of wet earth, crushed mint, and the faint, bitter perfume of burning cedar twigs from the bathhouse flue. The only sounds in the open space were the rhythmic scraping of her iron trowel against the gravel, the low, steady rustle of the dry reeds at the edge of the terrace, and the deep, periodic sigh of the mountain forest. The entire scene breathed with a vast, unhurried discipline that seemed completely undisturbed by the desperate desire for completion that was spinning through Koji's intellect. Koi stood near the stone base of the lantern, his fingers picking nervously at the hem of his sleeve, his chest tightening with a raw, confrontational frustration. He stepped into the light of the charcoal brazier and spoke of his internal struggle, admitting that despite his efforts to see himself as a deep granite cistern, his mind could not stop treating his empty bed as a proof of permanent failure. He confessed that he felt trapped in a state of constant, exhausting hesitation, unable to step forward into his work because he was always waiting for an external partner to arrive and tell him he was enough. He looked at the heavy, dark pieces of the dismantled lantern and asked the old nun how she could spend her years tending a cold stone light that offered no warmth, no company, and no reciprocal comfort to her solitary life. Shizuka did not drop her trowel, nor did she offer a soft, sentimental phrase to soothe his agitation. She slowly reached down, picked up the flat, circular piece of gray river shale, and placed it directly into Koji's open, trembling palm. The shale was completely smooth, flat, and dense, carry a damp coolness that immediately drew the frantic heat away from his skin. She pointed her chin toward the base of the stone lantern, which was currently resting unevenly on the damp soil, leaning precariously toward the temple wall as if it were about to collapse under its own weight. In a quiet, clear voice that carried the simple precision of a chisel meeting rock, she told Koi that a foolish builder spends his whole life demanding that the ground change its shape to accommodate his structure, screaming at the mud, and trying to tie the lantern to the wall with fragile ropes of hemp so it will not fall. But a true stonemason looks directly at the uneven earth, finds a single piece of unyielding shale, and slides it firmly beneath the base until the pillar finds its own unmoving center. She then took the gray shale back from his hand and wedged it directly under the lowest edge of the granite pedestal. With a low, heavy groan, the stone base settled into place, its long vertical shaft rising perfectly straight and true into the dark air, completely independent of the surrounding buildings. She told Ko that his deepest torment was not coming from the simple absence of a romantic destiny, but from his constant, exhausting habit of treating every lonely prediction in his head as an absolute command that he had to obey. She explained that the stone lantern does not lean into the temple for warmth, and it does not spend its night weeping because it stands alone in the courtyard. It burns its tiny flame steadily because its base is perfectly aligned with its own hidden foundation. Koi sat down on the low stone steps of the meditation hall, his eyes fixed on the smooth piece of gray river shale that now bore the entire immense weight of the granite pillar. In that quiet interval between the rustle of the pines, one small, profound transformation took root within his solar plexus. He did not experience a magical, instantaneous disappearance of his human longing, nor did the silent kitchen of his memory suddenly fill with light. Instead, he made one small act of mental discipline. He stopped the habit of treating his thoughts as absolute truth. He took a slow, deep breath of the damp evening air, sat perfectly still with the immense uncertainty of his unshared future, and allowed the cold thud of loneliness to exist inside his chest without trying to cure it, escape it, or turn it into a final definition of his soul. He gave up the exhaustion of resisting reality, returning his attention completely to the solid stone beneath his frame. The old nun picked up her basket and walked slowly toward the dark corridor of the kitchen, her sandaled feet leaving a faint, disappearing trail on the wet moss as the night claimed the high valley. The mountain mist thickened, hiding the sharp outlines of the peaks and wrapping the stone lantern in a seamless, protective shadow that erased its solitary position from the view of the lower roads. Let this image of the leveling river shale and the self-centered stone lantern settle into the quiet background of your own mind tonight. Notice how the traveling scribe did not need to instantly change his circumstances or receive an external promise of love to find a deep, physical sense of containment. He simply had to stop using his own thoughts to whip his spirit into a panic. The open courtyard around the meditation hall is resting in the absolute silence of midnight, and the dark granite pillar is standing perfectly straight in the soil, requiring no external wall to keep it from falling. As you lie here in your own room, let your physical body imitate the solid, centered alignment of that stone base. You do not need to discover your future partner tonight, and you do not need to erase the raw, human ache of your longing before you are permitted to let your shoulders drop completely into the bedding. Let the frantic, replayed memories of rejection sink down through the mattress, allowing your awareness to settle into the wide, unvarnished, empty space of the present hour, where your true worth is completely safe from the changing arrangements of the world. When we examine the heavy, cold vacuum that pulls at your chest during these late hours, we can begin to dissect the intricate psychological machinery that converts a natural, solitary season into an agonizing crisis of personal worth. The sharp sting of looking at an unpressed pillow is not a message from the universe telling you that you are permanently flawed. It is the raw consequence of an ego that has spent a lifetime using the fantasy of romantic validation as its primary shield against the raw vulnerability of existence. To avoid the terrifying possibility of being unseen or deemed unlovable, the mind creates an internal courtroom that never sleeps, tirelessly rehearsing a bleak future and replaying every awkward interaction from the past. We lie completely motionless under our sheets, analyzing our flaws and using intense self-judgment as a manipulative tool to force our spirits into a state of desperate, endless adaptation. We mistakenly assume that if we can only whip our hearts with enough shame, we can somehow fix our isolation and guarantee a shared destiny. Over time, this constant internal friction hardens into a rigid, painful identity, until we stop seeing our singlehood as a neutral, spacious clearing and begin to define our actual soul as an empty, ruined courtyard that has been permanently abandoned by the world. This toxic habit of turning a temporary environmental condition into a final measure of your internal value is exactly what ancient Buddhist wisdom seeks to illuminate and dismantle through the practice of gentle, non-defensive observation. The teaching invites us to look directly into our loneliness and separate the clean, immediate reality of our physical bodies from the elaborate mental architecture we build on top of the silence. There is a primary layer of human experience, the first pain, which is simply what life naturally brings to our door as we travel through a fluid, unpredictable universe. It is the simple fact that paths diverge, that long stretches of the journey are navigated in solitude, and that we must occasionally face a quiet room without the comfort of an external shoulder. This first layer of emotional weather is completely neutral, unavoidable, and carries no personal malice. It is merely the natural settling of the mountain mist after a long day of movement. But the secondary layer, the second pain, is the infinite, exhausting web of commentary that your mind adds to the dark. It is the terrifying story that insists your isolation makes you an unwanted outcast, the constant checking of external mirrors for a proof of your desirability, and the profound resistance that treats an empty half of a bed as a total bankruptcy of your spirit. We cannot always control the first pain through sheer force of intellect, nor can we demand that a solitary season change its shape just because we fear the quietness of our own skin. But we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the secondary fire of our own anxious commentary. We can notice the creeping sensation of inadequacy behind our sternum and choose to witness its presence without turning it into an executioner's blade that determines our right to exist. True peace, within this deep perspective, is never defined as the total absence of human longing, nor is it a magical guarantee that you will never feel the cold chill of an empty kitchen again. Peace is an entirely different, non-defensive relationship with that longing. It is the willingness to look at the unpressed pillow beside you and recognize that your value does not depend on your ability to find a romantic mirror for the world to see. Your ultimate safety lives in the wide, self-contained capacity of your own awareness, which holds the silence of the midnight hour with the exact same unconditional grace that it once held the warmest moments of companionship. When you bring this simple, stabilizing clarity to the cold areas beneath your ribs, the very texture of your isolation begins to shift its weight. You see that you do not need to solve the riddle of your future destiny or cure your natural longing before you are permitted to let your eyes grow heavy tonight. The desperate habit of using shame to fix your identity only tightens the internal knots, making the heart feel like a hard, dry block of unaligned stone. By realizing that your true nature was never the temporary relationship status, the external validation, or the specific family structure you built in the lower towns, the terrifying stakes of your singlehood begin to dissolve into the shadows of the room. You are not a fragile structure that is about to collapse because it stands alone in the courtyard. You are the solid stone base that has found its own unyielding foundation, perfectly straight, perfectly secure, and perfectly free regardless of whether the lantern is shared or solitary. The quietness descending upon your inner world is not a deficit to be hidden away. It is the natural, dignified arrival of your seasoned depth, a rich reservoir of accumulated truth that requires no external completion to maintain its permanent place in the cosmos. Slowly, this quiet integration allows the heavy wheels of your analytical mind to drift into a soft, effortless glide. The phantom futures of a permanent, lonely old age and public humiliation that were keeping your pulse fast lose their sharp, geometric edges, melting away like the wood smoke rising from the hermitage forge into the vast evening sky. You do not have to carry the heavy ledgers of your romantic competition into your dreams tonight. The realization that you are the silent space witnessing the turning of your seasons rather than the broken, incomplete object trapped inside them brings a profound physical reassurance to your entire frame. Let the muscles along your shoulder blades uncoil completely, letting the back of your skull settle deep into the center of your bedding as you surrender the daily chore of steering your own vitality. The room around you requires no frantic display before it agrees to shelter you, and the deep night is entirely satisfied to wrap your body in a dark, unmapped sanctuary where there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to fear. This steady, silent collection of our energy inside the open courtyard is not intended to remain confined to a remote mountain hermitage. It is a vital, practical anchor designed to be brought directly into the fragmented, hyper-accelerated landscape of your modern daily existence. We encounter our modern volatile storms not on the paths of ancient orchards, but in the small, frantic habits that repeat themselves throughout our waking hours. We feel it when we are lying awake at night, our fingers twitching as we repeatedly lift a digital screen to check for a text, a notification, or a sudden signal of validation that might offer a temporary burst of reassurance, treating a silent application as a terrifying confirmation that we are falling behind in life and that our personal relevance is completely dissolving. We experience it when our thoughts keep replaying an old romantic misstep from years ago, or when we look at the carefully curated announcements of couples moving into shared homes and find ourselves trapped in a cold spiral of comparison, convincing ourselves that everyone else has unlocked the secret to belonging while we remain stranded in the dark. We spend so much of our public routine pretending to be perfectly fine, plastering a polite, easy smile across our face while carrying an immense, heavy sadness right behind our throat. We try to manipulate the trajectory of our social circles, our domestic futures, or our long-term connections through constant, exhausting overanalysis. Yet when our physical frame finally collapses from the sheer weight of this mental architecture, we find ourselves unable to sink into sleep because an invisible inner critic insists that wanting rest without earning a shared destiny is an act of guilt. But true peace is never achieved by finally discovering a flawless interface or a perfect match that eliminates all human vulnerability. Peace is practiced in the tiny, unnoticed gaps of a chaotic afternoon. It is the willingness to pause for a single, unhurried moment before you check your notifications for validation, recognizing that this brief suspension of action is a profound form of living wisdom, a deliberate breath taken before you answer, and demanding message or look into an empty kitchen is a direct realization that not every frantic thought spinning through your mind deserves your immediate obedience, and not every rapid spike of loneliness is an absolute command to pull your life apart. You can care deeply about love, intimacy, and the shared warmth of companionship without gripping the concept of partnership so tightly that your forearms turn to iron and your chest turns to stone. You can live with an unresolved transition, with a slower social calendar, or with a temporary quietness in your private quarters, without letting that space ruin the simple, neutral reality of the room you are currently inhabiting, just as the temple courtyard held its unlit stone lantern without needing to change an inch. You are fully permitted to drop the heavy ledgers of your romantic competition right now, simply because your body is tired, and because your existence does not require you to find a witness before it agrees to grant you rest. When you bring this seasoned grounding into your modern domestic triggers, the nature of your waiting changes its form. The slow period in your social life, the lack of an immediate partner, or the natural dissolution of an old connection is no longer an emergency that proves your worthlessness. It is simply a moment where the foundation has become perfectly level beneath the slate, letting the old, leaning habits drop naturally away so that the substance of your true awareness can show its face. By refusing to spin 5 different hypothetical disasters out of a quiet evening, you allow the present moment to remain exactly what it is, a soft, spacious gap that does not require you to write a tragic conclusion for it before the sun rises. You stop treating your natural solitude as a defect to be corrected through shame, and you let it become a protective sanctuary where your active intellect can finally drop its sharpest chisels. As you lie here in the deep, velvety shadow of the late evening, let this poetic loosening move through the specific modern worries that were keeping your pulse fast an hour ago. The digital devices can remain dark. The indicators of external approval can remain silent, and the frantic pace of the outside world can be left to run its race without your participation. You do not have to achieve a brilliant, matching breakthrough before your eyelids are allowed to grow heavy. The entire physical world has turned away from the blinding friction of the sun, letting the cool evening air fall upon the damp earth without asking permission from anyone, and you are entirely safe to follow its rhythm. Let your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch deeper into the bedding, letting the small muscles across your temples relax, and allow your frame to settle into the supportive depth of the mattress, trusting that the unmoving sediment of your own accumulated truth already knows exactly how to hold you without you needing to guide it. The public squares have fallen completely silent now, leaving only the vast, dark expanse of the late night to fill the unpressed spaces of your room. The internal courtrooms have all been dissolved. The smooth piece of gray river shale has been wedged firmly beneath your foundation, and the frantic, buzzing comparisons of the daytime hours are no longer being tracked by your tired eyes. Let the speed of your internal monologue slow down to a whisper, matching the slow, heavy settling of the mountain orchard as the damp mist thins and clears beneath a silent sky. Your body is becoming profoundly heavy, sinking down into the mattress like that ancient granite basin buried deep within the dark soil, unmoving and entirely untouched by the wind. With every unhurried breath you let go, your head feels increasingly spacious, increasingly empty, completely untangled from the frantic choreography of domestic survival. You have full permission to stop solving your whole life tonight. The unmade arrangements, the digital messages, and the hypothetical futures you have been replaying do not need to be sorted, fixed, or conquered before you are allowed to sleep. Let the phantoms dissolve, letting the multiple versions of next year lose their terrifying sharpness as the cool air of your room enters and leaves your frame. You are no longer required to build a shared fortress across the unknown wilderness of the future, and you do not need to guarantee an external witness before your eyes can close. The solitary courtyard you have been resisting was never an empty ruin. It is simply the natural clearing of a supportive earth, and tonight your hands can rest completely, leaving your mind entirely unburdened by tomorrow. Listen to the absolute stillness that remains when the urge to maintain an external reflection finally goes to sleep. The room around you is perfectly secure, and your breathing has become so quiet, so deep, that it barely ripples the stillness of the dark atmosphere across your sheets. The teaching is settling into the very core of your chest now, not as a complex lesson to memorize, but as a physical feeling of returning home to a baseline of peace that never needed an unpressed pillow to find its value. You are the wide, dark mountain orchard at midnight, where the stone cistern is completely full, dark and still, mirroring nothing but the deep peace of the sky. There are no separate halves here, no separate failures to calculate, and no walls to maintain against the changing weather. Let yourself sink completely into the dark support of this deep sleep, giving up the final, stubborn pieces of the tools you have carried all day. The high valley is vast enough to hold everything you left unfinished, and the earth does not require your container to be filled by another before agreeing to support its weight. Every muscle along your brow, your jaw, and your hands has gone completely slack, soft and open like a dried lotus seed pod resting in the cool shadows of the terrace. The dilemmas you spent all day trying to fix have lost their urgency, dissolving into nameless, quiet shadows that float harmlessly through the background of your consciousness. You are returning to the silent clarity that existed long before your mind learned how to worry about being enough. A sanctuary of pure, untroubled presence that has never left your side. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary eyes to close completely on the noise of the towns as you slide effortlessly into a deep, unbroken rest. When the pale bamboo ladle rests completely dry upon the stone, whose reflection remains untouched within the deep water of the basin. The water needs no companion to understand its own depth, and it does not feel depleted when the surface becomes perfectly still under the cover of the starless night. When we look into the quiet reservoir of this late hour, we can see that our lifelong search for romantic completion has been based on a profound misunderstanding of our own nature. We have treated our consciousness like a fragmented puzzle that must constantly hunt for its missing piece in the faces of others, forgetting that the baseline of our being is already an unblemished, sovereign masterpiece. The emptiness you feel on the other side of your bed is not a structural failure of your destiny. It is simply the natural clearing away of external mirrors, so that the silent, unshakable background of your life can finally become known to you. You are not an isolated outcast waiting to be rescued from the dark. You are simply stepping out of the crowded, exhausting market square of human validation and entering the deep, protective sanctuary of your own seasoned weight. True spiritual maturation is the discovery that you do not need to be perpetually witnessed or endlessly desired to be profoundly real to the earth. The ancient trees in the abandoned orchard do not apologize because their branches grow alone in the mountain mist, and the granite foundations of the hermitage do not feel a sense of failure because they remain completely motionless in the soil, while the younger leaves dance in pairs. They understand the immense, self-contained power of simply holding space. When you allow your mind to stop churning the water tonight, you are aligning your spirit with that very same elemental strength. The anxieties that seemed so solid and terrifying during the day, the fear of a lonely old age, the pressure to conform to a traditional domestic script, the subtle guilt of resting without a partner's approval, begin to reveal themselves as nothing more than temporary patterns of weather, passing over an immovable peak. Let your awareness expand past the narrow boundaries of your current worries, letting it become as wide and non-judgmental as the dark night sky that blankets the entire valley. In this vast space, there is room for your longing, room for your unanswered questions, and room for the quiet uncertainty of your future. You do not have to force these elements to resolve themselves or find a perfect match before you are permitted to let go of your conscious grip. The universe is perfectly capable of holding the unformed pieces of your life while your body takes its necessary rest. Every slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest is a living proof that you are being sustained by a force that is infinitely larger than your analytical intellect or your relationship status. You can trust this rhythm completely, allowing the heavy architecture of your defense mechanisms to uncoil and dissolve into the deep shadows of your bed. As you sink deeper into this soft, effortless surrender, feel the profound physical relief that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. The small lines of tension around your eyes, your jaw, and your hands are smoothing out entirely, melting away like cedar shavings dropping into the cool earth. There is no longer any social ledger to check, no longer any peer to outrun, and no longer any need to justify your existence through the eyes of another human being. The fire in the forge has cooled to a peaceful, silent ash. The heavy granite pillar rests undisturbed on its shale base, and your mind has become as flat, cool, and clear as the water in the solitary stone cistern. You are safely home, wrapped in a dark, protective sanctuary where your weary soul is fully permitted to drop its burdens and slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The dreamless sleep deepens, widening out into an absolute, timeless expanse where the frantic measurements of the daytime world hold no jurisdiction over your consciousness. As you float within this deep, dark space of physical rest, we can look back one final time at the profound illusion that caused your spirit so much burning exhaustion. We spend our lives running from the moments of emptiness and closure, treating every collapsed project as if it were an open grave that threatens to bury our identity. But ancient insight reminds us that the dissolution of a form is never a tragedy. It is simply the natural opening up of space so that something more mature can take root. The project, the dream, or the venture that ran aground was not the destination of your life. It was merely a temporary classroom, a specific field of friction where your soul could practice the arts of determination, creativity, and resilience. Now that the class has dismissed and the walls have fallen away, you are permitted to walk out into the open night, carrying the full, indestructible harvest of your lessons within your very blood. When we look at the natural world, we see that it never clings to its old structures with the desperate, agonizing grip of the human intellect. The mountain cliffs allow their rocks to break and fall into the valleys below during the frost, knowing that the breaking does not diminish the majesty of the peak, but simply creates the fertile soil where the deep-rooted heather can grow. The river delta does not fight against the mud that settles within its mouth. It welcomes the silt, spreading its waters wide into 1,000 quiet, peaceful streams that find their way to the ocean without needing a single straight channel. By surrendering your heavy frame to the mattress tonight, you are stepping back into this wide, interconnected cosmic rhythm, recognizing that you do not need to be a rigid, unyielding monument of perpetual expansion to be an essential and beautiful piece of the universe. Your worth is an intrinsic quality of your awareness, a permanent light that remains completely unblemished whether your external hands are building an empire or resting empty in the dark. Let the final, lingering calculations behind your eyes dissolve completely into the cool, velvety shadows that wrap themselves around your bed, the phantom voices of public judgment, the unread indicators of your bank balances, the replayed conversations of your final meetings, and the sharp anxiety of what tomorrow will bring are all losing their geometric grip on your attention, melting away like the dark peat smoke rising into the winter sky. You do not have to map out a single strategy or defend a single choice before your body is fully allowed to drop into the deep currents of rest. The active marketplace has closed its gates, the world has suspended its demands, and the night is entirely satisfied to hold your tired frame within an unconditional, protective embrace that requires no proof of your productivity to grant you sanctuary. You are safe to let go of the oars completely. As your breathing becomes smaller, quieter, and deeply unhurried, feel the immense physical peace that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. Every muscle across your forehead, your jaw, and your hands has gone completely slack, soft and open, like a dried lotus seed pod resting in the cool shadows of the marshlands. The heavy iron cargo weight has been laid down for good. The broken wooden hull has found its perfect rest in the silt, and your mind has become a wide, unruffled delta that holds nothing but the simple, silent movement of the late hour as it settles over your roof. There are no separate ventures left to salvage, no separate mistakes left to replay, and no separate versions of yourself left to fix or defend. You are safely home, resting within the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been your true ground long before you ever learned how to worry about failure. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The dreamless sleep expands into an absolute, timeless expanse where the frantic measurements of the daytime world hold no jurisdiction over your consciousness. As you float within this deep, dark space of physical rest, we can look back one final time at the profound illusion that caused your spirit so much burning exhaustion. We spend our lives running from the moments of emptiness and closure, treating every solitary season as if it were an open grave that threatens to bury our identity. But ancient insight reminds us that the dissolution of a form is never a tragedy. It is simply the natural opening up of space, so that something more mature can take root. The partnership, the dream, or the relationship that faded was not the destination of your life. It was merely a temporary classroom, a specific field of friction where your soul could practice the arts of determination, creativity, and resilience. Now that the class has dismissed and the walls have fallen away, you are permitted to walk out into the open night, carrying the full, indestructible harvest of your lessons within your very blood. When we look at the natural world, we see that it never clings to its old structures with the desperate, agonizing grip of the human intellect. The mountain cliffs allow their rocks to break and fall into the valleys below during the frost, knowing that the breaking does not diminish the majesty of the peak, but simply creates the fertile soil where the deep-rooted heather can grow. The river delta does not fight against the mud that settles within its mouth. It welcomes the silt, spreading its waters wide into 1,000 quiet, peaceful streams that find their way to the ocean without needing a single straight channel. By surrendering your heavy frame to the mattress tonight, you are stepping back into this wide, interconnected cosmic rhythm, recognizing that you do not need to be a rigid, unyielding monument of perpetual expansion to be an essential and beautiful piece of the universe. Your worth is an intrinsic quality of your awareness, a permanent light that remains completely unblemished whether your external hands are holding another's or resting empty in the dark. Let the final, lingering calculations behind your eyes dissolve completely into the cool, velvety shadows that wrap themselves around your bed, the phantom voices of public judgment, the unread indicators of your social circles, the replayed conversations of your past, and the sharp anxiety of what tomorrow will bring are all losing their geometric grip on your attention, melting away like the dark cedar smoke rising into the winter sky. You do not have to map out a single strategy or defend a single choice before your body is fully allowed to drop into the deep currents of rest. The active marketplace has closed its gates, the world has suspended its demands, and the night is entirely satisfied to hold your tired frame within an unconditional protective embrace that requires no proof of your productivity to grant you sanctuary. You are safe to let go of the oars completely. As your breathing becomes smaller, quieter, and deeply unhurried, feel the immense physical peace that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. Every muscle across your forehead, your jaw, and your hands has gone completely slack, soft and open like a dried seed pod, resting in the cool shadows of the marshlands. The heavy iron cargo weight has been laid down for good. The unpressed half of the bed has found its perfect rest in the silence, and your mind has become a wide, unruffled delta that holds nothing but the simple, silent movement of the late hour as it settles over your roof. There are no separate ventures left to salvage, no separate mistakes left to replay, and no separate versions of yourself left to fix or defend. You are safely home, resting within the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been your true ground long before you ever learned how to worry about loneliness. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.